Hey, what's up? My name is Chris, and welcome to Coding in Public. Today I want to show you this little UX UI component that I created on a side project I was working on. I just wanted to create a little bit more of a fun experience. It was for like a book reading checklist, and as you check books off, you want to have a little feeling of accomplishment, and what makes you feel that more than this? All right, and so you can come and check it on and off, and then I actually have a dark mode theme as well, and we'll be setting both of these up. And again, you just push that little button and you get this cool little animation. So that's what we're going to work on, and let's go ahead and jump right in. Okay, so if I come over here, I've gone ahead and gotten some of the scaffolding out and ready so that we can focus on mostly the CSS, which is what most of today's video will be about. I'm going to start though with a main tag, which is where the main content would live on a page, and then I'm going to have a div called button container, and this is just so we can scale it up a little bit so that it's not as small as it would be like in a normal UI for some kind of checkbox. Inside here, I'm going to go ahead and have just a basic button itself, a button element. And then if we go back to the example, there's kind of three things we need to worry about. There's first of all the check itself right here. And then as you can see, there's actually two rings of these circles. One of them's larger and one of them's smaller and a little bit more opaque. So that's what we're going to work on. And we're going to add those kind of one after the other. And I've gone ahead, I'm just going to paste them in here. You can grab these from the code pin in the description. And you can see here I've got a checkmark itself. It's got a path, which is the actual line, and I've got a class of checkmark on that, and a stroke width of 4. I got this from Hero Icons, which is a free open source icons put out by the makers of Tailwind. All right, next I created these little circular things in a design program and just exported them. And all it is a bunch of circles in a ring. And you can see here that on every other circle, I've got alternate as the class, and they don't necessarily line up like this in the actual SVG code, but in the design, it's every other circle that's a different color. And so I'm just adding the class of alternate there. And then each of these SVGs is going to have a class of explosion, and then the large one will have explosion large, and the small one will have explosion small, which is right here. All right, the final thing we need to add is actually just a audio source. So I'm going to come in here and add an audio tag, and the source itself is this free sound that I got here from freesound.org. It's in the public domain, and so I just grabbed the MP3 from that, and that's what we've added here. Okay, so I've got everything we need, and if I save it, you can see some of that dark mode starts to come into effect because I've already linked up a style sheet, and I've already added some basic styling. So let me show you what is going on over here. All right, number one, I've got a basic clear, and then I've gone ahead and set CSS variables here for both light and dark. You'll notice that it's HSL, but I haven't wrapped it in HSL, and that's so that we can do some kind of on-the-fly opacity to it, add an alpha channel when we need to, and I'll show you that in a little bit here. By default, it has the light mode theme, and then if they prefer dark mode, then it points those variables to our dark variables up here. And then all we're going to do is call these every time we want to color something, and then the system color will figure out whether or not they should show light or dark mode. So if I come back here and switch to dark mode, or light mode rather, it'll now switch back to my light mode color, which is right here up this way. Okay, so we have also added, I've added some styling to the main tag itself. So I'm basically saying take the full height, display grid, put everything in the middle, set this as the background color, and then that's pretty much it. All right, so let's go ahead and work on a couple other things so that that button is a little bit bigger than it should be in a UI, but so that we can see it, I'm going to just add a transform scale of like, let's do 8 or something like that, I think is what I had on the code pen. And that way it's massive. We'll fix that here in a second. Actually, maybe let's comment this out for now until we can kind of see what's going on. Let me make sure I'm not zoomed in. Oh, I already am zoomed in. All right. I thought it looked kind of big. All right, so that's what it should look like normally. And then maybe we can go ahead and scale it up so we can work on it a little bit bigger. All right, next I'm going to grab the actual button itself. And inside here, we're going to have a width of 24 pixels, a height of 24 pixels. So we're just going to set the actual box size of that. We're going to set the background color. And I'm going to set that to HSL accent 1, no, background, like that. And again, on dark mode, this would pick up the dark mode background, which is great. Next, I'm going to set the border to none. We're going to have that gradient border, which we're actually going to do with a pseudo element, and so we don't actually want a border on the button itself. Now I do want a border radius here, and we're going to do border radius of 0.25 rem. And then I'm going to add a position of relative because we're going to use, again, that pseudo element itself, and we need to position it relative to the button. And we are going to have a box shadow. So I'm going to go ahead and add that now. And I'm going to add 2 box shadows, and you can add them one right after the other. What I've done is say, hey, go over to the right 2 pixels, go down 4 pixels, have 5 pixels of blur, and then I want HSL here of my accent 1. And then like I mentioned, you can add an alpha channel since I've written it the way I have. And so we'll do 80% basically. And then I'm going to say the next one I want to be 2 pixels up. Let's see. I think that is just about what I want. Let's see, accent 2. We're going to make this 0.4. And let's see. I'm going to have this point, or let's have this 6 pixels, I think is what I had. All right, so you can see kind of right here. So this is the lighter pink shadow, the second one we added, and this is the darker purple shadow. And we are going to add some hover effects here. So I'm going to add a transition. And what I want is on the background color. For 400 milliseconds, I'm going to have ease in and out. And then I'm going to add one more for the box shadow itself. And I'm going to have 400 milliseconds ease in and out. All right, so let's go ahead and add a hover and a focus effect. So I'm going to say is, and let's grab the hover and the focus. This is selector allows us to grab both of those at the same time. We're just going to say that the box shadow should be none on those. And then we're going to add a class that will actually determine when that checkbox goes off. And that will be checked. And whenever that comes on, we're going to say that we want the background color here to be transparent. And we want the box shadow to be none once again. So now if I were to come over here, you can see just hovering and focusing takes off that box shadow itself, which is what we want. Obviously, we haven't added this checked class. We're going to do that with JavaScript here in a little bit. Now next, let's go ahead and add that gradient border. You can do this with an after element like this, and you do need content always on this, even if you don't have content. So I'm going to do that here, and I want a position of absolute. And here what we're going to do is we're going to say we want it to be inset -3 pixels. So in other words, I want it to be outside of its parent container by 3 pixels on all directions. This is the same as saying top -3 pixels, right -3 pixels, etc., etc. And the support for this is pretty good. You would probably want some kind of auto prefixer in production, but this should work for just writing your code. And then I'm going to have a z index here of -1 so that it's behind the actual element. So we can actually see what's going on here. Let's add that background gradient. And basically what we're going to be doing, let me go ahead and take off this Z index for now, is adding the whole background as a gradient. So I'm going to say background, and then I'm going to add a linear gradient here. We're going to do 321 degrees. That allows the pink to be kind of in the area that that box shadow is at. And then I do want it just like that. All right, HSL accent 1 and accent 2. So what I'm saying is basically go from this angle down here, and I want it to follow this lighter color down to the darker purple color. And now let's go ahead and put on this linear or this Z index, and you can see now it pulls behind that button because of the way our stacking context works. Now the stacking context is a little bit odd, and basically if I come back up here, there's a reason I put this position relative and Z index 1, because it wraps both the button and its child, which allows me to stack this after pseudo element behind the button. It's a little confusing, but if you follow it like this, it should work. All right, next we're going to add a border radius so that it follows the parent there. And what I did up top was to 0.25 rem, but if I save this, well, first of all, if I spell it correctly, border radius. If I save it like this, it doesn't quite look right. It kind of pulls off a bit. And usually when you have two border radiuses going up against each other, you want the outer one to be a little bit larger, and that tends to work a little bit better. So I'm going to say 0.4, and now that looks a little bit more natural. All right, before we do too much, let's go ahead and come in here, and what I want to do is I'm just going to write the script tag directly in here. This would be the JavaScript. In this use case, just to show you it quickly, I think it's worth just doing it quickly like this. So we're going to say the buttons here. This is going to be our document.query selector, and we're going to grab just the button tag itself. In this case, we only have one. I guess let's say all, just in case we happen to have more later that we add to the page. And I'm going to say buttons.forEach button, and we're just going to grab each button like this and do a little arrow function. For each of these buttons, we want to add an event listener, and that will be click. And when that happens, we're going to run a function or have the browser do it for us called toggle button animation. I'm going to grab this, and then up top here, let's go ahead and write this function like this. And I'm going to take in the event that's going to be passed to me, and then I just want to say e.current target, which is the thing it was called against. I'm not going to do e.target just in case I click on an SVG or something like that. I could hide pointer events as well to make sure I'm not clicking on SVGs, but this works just as well. So in other words, I'm calling this, I'm saying, give me the thing I put the event listener on, which is the current target. And for that, I want to say .ClassList.toggle, and we're going to toggle checked like that. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and save that, and then I should be able to come in here and check it. And when I do, you see it actually pulls in and out. And I can see one more thing we need to add here. We do need to add a cursor of pointer like that. So now I should be able to get this little cursor. I click, and it actually transitions to this state right here where the color is transparent on the actual button so that the whole background of that pseudo element shines through. And if I click again, it removes. Okay, let's come back down here. Now what we want to do is worry about that checked status. You might remember that we had a class on the path itself, and if I can get to it here, check mark right here. So let's go ahead and come down here, and we're just going to say whenever there's a checked class, that inside of it there's a class of check mark. Then what I want to do is I actually want to offset that a little bit and do that animation. Now, probably the best thing to do would be to come in here first of all, and what we need to do is figure out a few things about this checked or this check mark. So the first thing I need to do is we need to set the stroke value. So I'm going to set the stroke to my HSL var background. So it's the same as whatever the background color is, whether light or dark. Next, what I need to do is I need to actually offset the stroke itself by the length of the stroke. I've done a video on this really recently, but what I'll do is just come in here. Whoa, I'm kind of zoomed in. Let's grab inside here the button and this path right here. So I'm going to grab, let's just grab anything that's path. So I'm going to come in here and say document. I think that's the only one I've got. Query selector. Either way, it's the first on the page. So this should give me, yeah, what I need. And I'm going to say get total length. And this is just a method that lives there. So now I know it's that long. So what I can do is then offset it and basically create dashes. So I can come in here and say stroke dash array like that. And let's see, that wasn't right. I think it was 19. I think I cut off the 19. There you go. So right now that works. Let's go ahead and change this to something we can see. So accent 1, you can see it there. So in other words, I'm just saying, hey, this should be a stroke here. And if I offset that a little bit, stroke dash array offset, let's say offset it by like 2 or something like that. You can see it actually offsets it this way, and this next little section will be blank. And then if it were to keep rotating, the next dash would be that length as well, this 19.79. That's a little confusing, but again, I did a whole video explaining that not too long ago, and I'll add a link in the description. Basically, we're going to just offset this by the amount it needs to be. So 10, 12, and you see eventually if I say the same number, it's going to be empty, so nothing will be there. So then we can animate that on the opposite way, going back to 0 for the offset with it checked. So we're going to say animation. I'm going to call this checked, and then we'll do 350 milliseconds. And then for the speed or the timing, I've got a cubic Bezier curve I'm just going to add in here. And again, you can grab that from the code pen or figure out whatever kind of style you want for that. If it's just ease or something like that, that's fine as well. So now what we need to do is write that keyframe. So I'm going to say keyframes, and then here it's called, we called it what, checked. And then what I'm going to say is basically at 100%, so at the full checked mark, I just want these stroke dash offset to be 0. That should be right. So if I come in here and check, you see it pull in like that. Now we need to change this back so it doesn't look horrendous. All right, like that. So you can see it's just sliding back in and basically moving itself back into full position. All right, so we are mostly there with the CSS. We need to now work on these little circles though. Remember I said that every other one of these we set to a different color. And we did that with a class, let's see, of alternate right here. So all of these circles we can change, and then we'll just change the alternate after that. So let's come down here and let's grab, first of all the circle tags. And obviously you'd probably add classes to this in production, but just to show you what we're doing quickly. So I'm going to say fill, and this will be HSL, and it's accent 1. I'm going to grab the same thing here, copy this down, and say for the alternate, then I want this to be accent 2. You can see now every other circle is that color that we want it to be. Now all of those SVGs themselves had the tag, the class of explosion. And I want all of these to be position of absolute because I want them to be in reference to the button itself. And by default, I'm going to have these inset a little bit inside of the button itself. So we're going to do negative 0.25 rem like that. And so they'll be just inside the frame. If I did 0, just to kind of show you what that would look like, it would be inside like that. I want it to just be a little bit stretched out from the way I designed it originally. Now, when you first load the page, I'm going to have an opacity of 0 on these, and then we'll animate those colors coming on with an animation. And we have 2 circles, you'll remember. So whenever we have checked, we're going to first of all look at the explosion large. We're actually going to add another class called exploding, so that if you were to load this, like let's say you saved the state in local storage and reloaded this, it wouldn't explode every time the page load, just when they click. And so we can add that click class of exploding when we need it to. And then I will call it exploding large, like we've got suggested for us there. I'm going to do 0.8 seconds, ease in, out, and then I'm going to have a little delay on that just to kind of make it look more like an explosion. This timing seemed a little bit better for me. So we're going to save that, and then I'm going to copy this down, and we're going to have the same thing, except we're going to change this to small for both of these. And let's see, this needs to be, I think I figured out more like 6.5, something like that, and then 0.2 seconds. So this has a little bigger of a delay. All right, next let's write the keyframes here for, let's see, exploding large. And let's see, got some extra brackets in here. Okay, so we are going to start at 0% here. And for the exploding large, we do want it to be opacity 0 just to make sure it stays there. And then transform scale. We're going to start with a 0.1 scale, so it's going to actually shrink a little bit. And we are going to actually rotate it 5 degrees. And creating opposite rotations for each of these little explosions makes for a more realistic experience. All right, next we're going to come down here, and for the 20% and the 60%, here we want, percent. I want the opacity here to go to 1. So it's going to be full opacity. And then I'm going to come down here, and at 40%, I want to go ahead and grab the transform again here. Here we're going to go to scale of 2, and then a rotate of 10 degrees. And then finally at 80%, I've got an opacity back down to 0. So if I were to come over here and click, we should get something happening. Except you remember we added an extra little class here for exploding, and so it's not going to happen until we add that. So let's go ahead and add that in. Let's see, over here and over here, just to see it as we're styling it, exploding, because we're going to add that again in JavaScript. So I should be able to come here, yeah, and that big one pops up like that. And you see it's rotating just slightly, and then it shrinks, and as it's shrinking, it's now going back to opacity of 0. Okay, let's go ahead and copy this down, and I'm now going to do exploding small as well. Exploding small right there. And that should be the same. We're actually going to make this go negative, so we'll go negative 4 degrees here, and then 30% and 60%. We're not going to go to full opacity here. We're just going to do 0.16. So it'll actually not ever get to full opacity, not even close, really, for the smaller one. And then because it's small, we don't want it to scale quite as much, so we're going to do 1.6. And then we're going to rotate it in the opposite direction here, 10 degrees. And then at 80%, we will have it be at 0. So now if I save it here, and you can see both of those kind of spin oppositely and, pop up and pop back down. Now, even when I refresh the page, if I check here, they'll pop up. If I had this state saved, they would explode every time, which is why I want to save that exploding class for JavaScript. So we've got most of it done. Now we just need to make it to where we're actually adding that explosion on with JavaScript. That's really the last little thing we've got to do. And again, we're going to come back down here and then add in, I guess we got to add that audio too. All right, so once we've added that checked class, then what we want to do is look inside of the button we just clicked. So the e.current target, and we can just do a query selector all directly on this. What we want to grab is each of those little circles, and remember they all have the class of explosion in the middle of them. And so we're going to say for each, then we want to say for each, let's just call it explosion like that. We're going to say we want the explosion dot class list dot toggle, and we're going to toggle the class of exploding. So now we should be able to come in here and click, and it adds that exploding class, which is great. The last little thing we need to do then is to see if we need to play the sound. Now we don't want to play it when we check the box away. We only want to play it when we actually are checking it on. So not when we're removing the check, but only when we're adding it. So when we're toggling it, we're not really sure if it's adding it or removing it just by the way it's written right now. So we need to write a little if statement here that just says if e.currentTarget now at this point in the function has the class list. So dot contains the class of checked. So if it now contains the class of checked, then what we want to do is actually run the audio. So let's go ahead and come up above this function, and we're going to say const, let's just call it bell, and we'll say document.querySelector, and we're just going to let's grab the audio tag. Obviously, you'd probably have multiple audio tags or something like that, so you want to give it a class, but for now, we're just going to do it like that. I'm going to say bell.play. If I do that and save it and click, you can hear that there. Now, that might be a little bit too loud for you, so you may not want it to be quite that loud. So what you can do is actually say bell, which is the audio that we're grabbing here, and then we can set the volume here to like or 0.4, something like that. And now you can hear it's a little quieter. All right, you can do 0.1 just to dramatize it a little bit. All right, there you go. So whatever you want, I'll leave it at 0.4. That seemed about right to me. There's one other little UX UI thing that might be kind of nice. So if you click, if the bell goes off right away, the timing just doesn't seem quite right. You kind of want the explosion to be happening at that time. So what we can do is actually put this play method inside of a little timer. So what we're going to do is say set timeout. And I'm going to write a little arrow function here and just say that that's what I want to do. And I want to do it after I found about 400 milliseconds was right. So it kind of explodes right at that point. Now you may want to change that. Maybe for you it's like 300. You feel like that's a little bit better. That's fine. Just to show you what it would look like to make sure you're seeing that. If we click it and put it at 3 seconds, 3 seconds later, then it plays. All right, so that's all we're doing is changing the timing of when this actually plays. Now, just in case somebody clicks it multiple times very quickly, that we want to actually clear this set timeout so that we don't have multiples of them stacked up. So what I'm going to do is actually add this, and let's outside of this function, we're going to have let sound timer like that. And then we're going to set this to sound timer equals. And then before we do anything here, what we're going to do is say clear timeout. And then we're going to say sound timer. So we're clearing that timeout every time just in case it's kind of waiting to do the last one. It clears it and then just sets a new one. The other thing we might want to do, even though this is a very short sound, is come in here right beforehand and say bell.currentTime and set this to 0. So in other words, start the audio over if for some reason it's still playing when they click it. Now, because they'd have to actually click, unclick, and then click again, I don't think that'll probably happen, but let's go ahead and do it just in case. All right, so that is actually all we got going here. And if I change this to dark, you can see now we've got the dark mode working as well with the cool little hover effect and everything. Hopefully that was a little fun project for you, and there are a couple things in there you can learn. I love the gradient kind of border idea. I love the idea of the dark and light mode theme, that little animating checkbox. There's a lot of little fun things here that makes it fun for a user when they're checking something off and kind of gamifies it just a little bit. Well, thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this, go ahead and subscribe, like the video, leave me a comment of what you'd like to see next as far as UX and UI, little micro animations. I'd love to play around with something like this a little bit more. All right, thanks so much for watching. I will catch you in the next one. Happy coding.